I'm going to go ahead and share. And I believe I have everything I need to share. All right, let's get you into where you need to be. There we are. So here we are in the text, and this is the
About
Parsha.
bracha.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So, yes, go ahead. Did you have a question? Yeah? No? All right. So the Parsha, as you can see, if you can read the Hebrew, is Tetzaveh, and essentially it consists of two major parts. The first part has to do, the major part has to do with the vestments of the high priest and the priests. The second part has to do with the ceremony of dedication of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle. And then we come to this final part in the Shvi'i, which seems out of context because we are going to talk about the golden altar, the incense altar that was placed in the sanctuary in front of the ark, so in front of the curtain of the Holy of Holies. It was in the sacred part, not in the Holy of Holies. And it was put in between the table for showbread and the menorah. And this seems strange that here it is, and we don't include it when we discuss the other furniture of the sanctuary in Parsha Truma. So the question that I've wondered about, and I haven't actually read an answer to this question as to why it's out of the context. And I can think of a few reasons. One is that we know that the sons of Aaron died when they were bringing incense that had not been commanded and placed it on this altar. We also know elsewhere that, for example, in the rebellion of Korach, there was an example of incense being used and where people died as a result of it. So one thing we do know is that this particular offering was a very powerful offering. It was like, atomic power, that it can be used for positive reasons, but it can also be very destructive. And so maybe because it had these really unique qualities and these associations, it's placed out of context almost at the very end of all these instructions that were being given. And another reason is that smoke, right, the column of smoke has some symbolism of being a connection, a direct connection between earth and heaven. And in fact, there are traditions that are not Jewish traditions that have to do with the significance of a chimney in a house. And in fact, there were places where in Christianity they celebrate Christmas with what is called the Yule log placed in the fireplace and be burning to send up this column of smoke upwards to heaven. And so the idea of incense that is very sweet smelling and pungent, and also representing the smoke that goes up to heaven. And for this reason, because it is in the presence, it represents a connection with something of ultimate power. It has these possibilities. We should, yeah, go ahead. You have a question.
In the Torah, when they talk about how the incense was made,
yes,
the comment is, if anything is not right, the punishment was death.
Right. That is actually in the Mishnah.
The Mishnah.
But it says in the case of the Torah, it talks about if anybody uses it for their own personal use. If they compound this exact recipe but use it for their own personal use, the punishment is death. You're right.
But I wondered in the Mishnah why the making of the incense was, I mean, a little thing that was left out, punishment but death. That means it's very, 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 very important.
Right. Every part is important. But again, I think it can help if we think about this, it can help us understand the degree to which the creator of the universe is this ultimate power beyond even our imagining. I think another reason too is that we know that the sense of smell is in a very deep part of the brain, and that it can affect our emotions very, very deeply. And I think that could be another reason that they knew about this from very, very early times, that our sense of smell is so significant in terms of our, who we are as human beings. And we very often talk the Torah uses the phrase reach nichoach, which means of pleasing fragrance before God, to describe a person's behavior. And sometimes we even use to describe somebody's behavior, we can say that stinks. So we know that a perfume or fragrances, etc., smells have a huge influence on us, and so it could be again all underlining the fact that this particular offering and this altar had a special significance. We could also say that that's underlined by its position in terms of the placement in the tabernacle. And I'm going to show you where it was. So I hope you can see this picture. Here is the altar. Do you see how it's directly placed? Well, Rashi makes a point that it's directly placed in front of the Aron. Here you can just see, well, you can't see the top of the Aron. Okay, maybe we can see it here.
Yeah,
Yep, this is
see it.
good. So there you can see, you can't see the altar here, but you can understand that it was placed directly opposite the Ark of the Covenant and its position here. So it's very, has a lot of symbolism and a lot of meaning. And Rashi, I don't want to anticipate Rashi too much, but we'll see other kinds of things. Let me show you this. Here's the altar. You notice that this was called a crown, this crown, right? So the showbread table also had a crown. There was also a crown around similar kind of thing around the Ark of the Covenant. They all had crowns, and they symbolized different things. So let
What
me
was the
get.
what
I'm
was the
sorry.
show what was the showbread?
The showbread table, I have to show you a picture of it. Let me see if I can find one for you. Hold on a second. I'll need to open it up. Let's see here. If I have it, in fact. Let's see. I may not have opened it here. May not. I'm sorry. I don't. I'd have to go and open it. Let me see if I can find it for you. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, I have to go to a previous in Truma. We read about it there. Let's take a look. This is it. Here we are. Let's see if this is going to be a nice picture of it. And so it's not a bad picture. Let's see. I have all kinds of. Let's see here. I have a nice. Oh, this is a nice picture of it too. Here we go. It's not in color, but it is a nice picture. Let's see. I don't think you can see it yet. Let me add to the share. Okay, let's see here. Oh, hold on a second. I don't want to lose everything I had. Okay, just 1 second. Yeah, you should see it in front of you. Can you see it
Yep.
now?
Yep.
This
Yeah.
is the table. That's the showbread table. See there, just some details about it, how it looked. There's the crown that you can see around it. And this actually symbolized, so they put bread on these pans right there. Okay. It was called showbread. It's the translation of the Hebrew lechem hapanim, the bread of faces, because it was bread that was flat and had these sides up, and these are the faces of the bread that it's referring to. And this actually symbolized the crown of kingship, because it sustained, it provided, right, the bread of the idea of sustenance, etc., etc. All right.
How was it used, Mordecai?
Basically, it was placed again. I can show you where it was. One moment. Let's see here. Here's where it was, right? And basically, they would put the loaves on. It would be, I believe, on Friday afternoon, they would put fresh loaves, and at the following, every week, they would remove the loaves and replace them with new ones. And there was a tradition that the loaves, when they took them off the table, were as fresh as they were when they were put on. And again, I think it's a way for us to understand the degree to which God's presence is life-sustaining. That the fact that God exists is the reason why we're able to exist at all, and also that our lives are sustained in this way too.
Mm. Did the priest eat the bread?
Yes, it went to the priest. It did go to them. Yes. So let's go into this now. So, va'asita mizbeach miktar ketoret. You shall make an altar for the offering up of incense, right? And this ketoret basically has the meaning of this column of smoke that the incense produces. Atzei shitim ta'aseoto. You shall make it of acacia wood. Miktar Ketoret, here's the Rashi, La'alot alav kitur ashan samim. That is so as to raise up on it a column of smoke of spices, right, of incense, essentially. That's what this whole means, for the sake of making incense and burning incense. Ama or core, now we have its dimensions. It is 1 or core, its length is 1 cubit, ma rochbo, and its width is 1 cubit, ravua yihiyeh, and now it says it shall be 4 square. V'amatayim kumato, and it is 2 cubits in height. Mimenu karnotav, its horns shall be of it. In other words, made out of it. Let's take a look at it here. So here we have a picture of it. So for 1 cubit by 1 cubit by 2 cubits. Here we are, another picture of it. So remember when it came to the bronze altar that we just talked about, how we had the opinion of one of the rabbis saying that since it uses the term ravuhu yeh, it shall be 4 square. It also meant that the bronze altar outside on which they offered the sacrifices was also double, the height was double its width and its breadth. Let's go back into the text. See if I have, okay. Onwards, v'tzipita oto zahav, you shall layer it with gold, tahor, pure gold, et gago, its roof, ve'et kirotav, and its walls, saviv, around, ve'et karnotav, and its horns, v'asita lo zer zahav saviv, and you shall make for it a crown of gold about it. So you can see how the picture is an illustration of what's being stated here. I want to go back for a moment to the altar. So here we are. This is the roof, so to speak, the gog. Now, it looks as if these are not part of it, but in the original, the altar, this would have been made out of the acacia wood too and overlaid with gold. So you can see this. All right, let's go back into Torah Mima. Take a look at the Rashi. So, et gago, its roof. Zehaya lo gag. So it says this altar had this covering, this roof. Aval mizbeach ha'olah, but the altar for the burnt offering, that is the bronze altar outside, lo haya lo gag. It did not have a roof like this. Ela mimal'im chalalo adama, but they would fill its airspace within this altar with earth. Bechol chaniatam, whenever they encamped, right, on their journeys. Zer zahav, he says, this golden crown, siman hu leketer kuhuna. So Rashi tells us that this is symbolic of the crown of the priesthood. So something that I recently realized with full force is the role of a priest in reconciling heaven and earth. I know I've mentioned this before, but that essentially the purpose of the priest was try and reconcile the relationship of humanity to the divine. And that's why they had to be so careful and so particular and so mindful about everything they did. Because if you think about it, there are so many things human beings do that are offensive in the face of the divine and what the universe was created to accomplish. And so the priests had to act in this way to be able to effect atonement and to make sure that things didn't happen that were even worse to the world. So we know that this was a very important role. Moses played this role several times. Going on. Ushtei tabot zahav, there were 2 rings of gold, ta'aselu, you shall make it, mitachat lazero, underneath or below its crown, al shtei tzalotav, on 2 of its sides, ta'aseh, you shall make, al shnei tzidav, on its, again, I think tzalot would mean its 2 walls, right? On its 2 walls you shall make, on its 2 sides, v'haya labatim levatim, and they shall be in which to place a place in which to place the staves, laset oto bahema, to carry it with them. So I'm going to show you the picture again and how Rashi is going to show. Here we are. So you notice how they're on, because it says it's on its 2 corners, and now it's below the crown. So here's a full picture of what it looked like.
Mhm.
It's actually sort of has a very modern kind of look to it, contemporary look in a way. So let's go back here. Let's take a look at Rashi. He says, Tzal Otav. So it's sides. Okay, but Sidav also means sides. So I'm going to translate it as its walls. Kan hu lashon zaviyut. So he says here, though, this word tzal otav means it has the meaning of its corners. Ketargumo, as is stated on the Onkelos. Here we go. Tartain zivyata, right? On its 2 corners you shall make it. So that's how Onkelos translates it. Ketargumor. And why does he say it's got to be on the corners and not on the sides as it is with the other altars? Shine'emar, because it says al shnei tzidav, it says on its 2 sides. On its 2 sides. Al shtei zaviyotav. In other words, on its 2 corners should be shnei tzidav that are on 2 of its sides. So a corner, right, in a sense, is a connection of the 2 sides. That's how it's understood now. V'haya, and it shall be maaseh hatabaot ha'eleh, the way in which these rings are made, levatim levadim. They should be a place for the staves. L'chol bayit tiyeh hatabat, right? And so, in other words, when it says this, in each place the ring shall be levad, alone. So, in other words, again, I'm going to show you the picture. Okay. Right, so here are the rings that we're talking about. Another picture of it, right? And the stave goes in all by itself. It doesn't have 2 rings in which to hold the stave. And I believe that's what Rashi's trying to explain to us right now. Let's make sure. Okay, here we go. V'asita et habadim, and you shall make these staves, these poles, atzei shitim, of acacia wood, v'tzipita otam zahav, and you shall again overlay them with gold. V'natata oto lifnei haparochet, and you shall place this altar in front of the parochet, parochet would be the curtain, asher al aron ha'izdut, which is over the ark of the testimony. Lifnei hakaporet, before the kaporet is the ark cover, asher al ha'idut, which is on the testimony, but it means, the ark, the bottom of the ark itself. Asher ivadev lecha shama, where I will appear to you. So just to review that for a moment, here we are. Let's take a look here. Here we are. So this is the parochet, and the ark cover. Let me see if I can find you another picture of that. Let's see. Here we go. So this thing here was essentially the ark cover, and it came off the ark itself. And these are the two cherubim that we're looking down on, and just so that you can see. So it was right opposite. Here it is. See, let's go here. Lifnei haparochet, in front of the curtain. Shema tomar mashuch keneged ha'aron letzafon uledarom. And lest you might say, the reason why, because the whole point was that it was in front of the ark, okay? And lest you should say that it was drawn opposite the ark, either to the north or to the south. Talmud Lomar, for this reason it says Lifnei HaKaporet. In other words, it says Parochet, but then it goes on. So it could have been in front of the curtain, but the placement of this particular altar could have been slightly towards the north or slightly towards the south. It doesn't tell, it just says in front of the curtain, as long as it's in front of the curtain. And that's why it goes on to say it's in front of the Kaporet, the ark cover. Mechuvan, in other words, it's set up directly keneged ha'aron mibachutz. It's set directly in front of the ark from the outside. In other words, on the other side of this curtain. Going on. Vehiktir alav Aharon ketoret samim, and Aaron should burn on it an altar of incense, right, of spices, baboker, so it means early in the morning, that's first thing in the morning. Behetivo et hanerot, when he trims the lamps, yaktirena, he shall set up, burn the incense. Behetivor. So of course we know that the word tov means good. So Rashi needs to explain exactly what this word behetivor means. Lashon nikui habezichim. So it has to do with the cleansing of the cups shel hamenorah, of the menorah. Midashen, he removes the ashes, mideshin haptilot, the ashes from the wicks, shenisrafu balayla, which had burned through the night. V'haya mativam b'chol boker b'boker. And so he would trim them every morning and remove the ashes every morning, early in the morning. Hanerot, so exactly what this is, and he uses the French word lux, right? Lux, it means light in Latin, right? But las meaning in medieval French. Why he has to explain this, I'm not certain. The word ner is not an uncommon word, but Rashi, obviously, there are reasons, and I must say, I don't know exactly why Rashi felt a need to give us a French translation of it. And this particular edition of Rashi has an editorial note where he translates it into Yiddish. So, lampen, lamps. V'chein kol neirot ha'amorot b'menorah, and likewise all the lamps that are mentioned in the candelabra, chutz mimakom shene'emar, right? So he's referring to trimming these lamps, trimming these wicks, and he says every time this word neirot is mentioned, it has to do with trimming them, I believe is what he's saying, right? But chutz mi'amakom, except in the place shene'emar.
Call from Harriet Rudinsky.
Hold on a second. Which says there, ha'al'ah. In other words, where it uses the word ha'al'ah, shehu lashon hadlaka, where it refers to lighting the lamps and not trimming them, not cleansing them, etc. So here we go. There's the word. Uveha'alot Aaron et hanerot, and when Aaron kindles these lamps, lights these lamps, bein ha'abaim, in the evening, yaktirena ketoret tamid, he should then, yaktirena, comma, he should then offer up the incense, ketoret tamid. So in the morning and in the evening, he lights the incense, he sends up the incense, ketoret tamid, a perpetual offering of incense, lifnei Hashem, before the Lord, l'dor techem, for all your generations. Okay, so uvaha'alot, and when he lights, keshe yadlikam. In other words, when he lights the menorah, la'alot lahavatam. In other words, and the Rashi is explaining why it uses ba'alot, which means to raise up, and what he means is to raise up the flame. In other words, to make sure that there's a flame coming out of these cups of the menorah. Yaktirena, he should offer up the incense. Bechol yom, so every day, pras maktir shacharit, he would put half the amount of the daily incense in the morning, upras maktir bein harbayim, and he offer up half of the other half in the evening. So twice a day. Lo, here we go. Lo ta'alu alav ktoret zara. You shall not place on it any foreign type of incense, the olah, nor a burnt offering, mincha, or a meal offering, the nesef, or libation.
Yeah.
1 second. 1 second. Lo tisku alav. You shall not, in other words, offer libation on it. Did you have a question, Morris? Okay. All right. Let's go back here. Lo ta'alu alav. You shall not, offer upon it. Al mizbach, in other words, on this particular altar, ktoret zara, a foreign incense. Shum ktoret shel nidava. In other words, even if you just want to offer up a free will offering, a gift offering of incense, kulan zarot. In other words, it might even be the exact, it's meaning coming from you. You're not doing it as a response to a divine commandment. Lo chutz mizu. Okay, so in other words, other than the one that's mandated by God, any other incense now is considered foreign, and you're not allowed to do it. It needs to be done at the command of God and what God has commanded. The olah mincha, in other words, burnt offering or meal offering. The lo olah or mincha. So in other words, and nor a burnt offering or a meal offering. Olah shel behema, the burnt offering is of an animal. The off or a bird, umincha, and whereas a mincha is he shall lechem. It means of bread. In other words, as I said, a meal offering. V'chiper alav al kornotav, and Aaron shall make atonement on its horns, achat b'shana, once a year. Midam chatat, from the blood of the sin offering, hakipurim, of the atonement offering. In other words, this was done on Yom Kippur. Achat b'shana, once a year, yichaper alav ledorotechem, he shall make atonement on it for all your generations. Kodesh kodashim hu Lashem, it is most holy, it is holy of holies to the Lord. It's interesting here, of course, that the Torah is making reference to Yom Kippur, which at this point isn't, in fact, something that has been mentioned up to this point at all. And Yom Kippur essentially comes to atone for the sin of the golden calf. And at this point, at least in the narrative of the Torah, we haven't mentioned anything about the golden calf whatsoever. So there's a good question as to, and of course, they built the tabernacle after the golden calf, and it happens next week when we read Ki Tisa. That's where we read about this. So we read about these instructions before, and then, of course, there are two more parshiot, two more chapters that deal, or sections that deal with the continued construction and details of the construction of the tabernacle. And so it comes right in between. And I think that's to indicate a certain two sort of values. One is that the privilege of making, that God so wanted us to be able to do this, right, to build the Mishkan at this particular point, even though ultimately the idea was to build the temple in Jerusalem, and at the same time to give us the opportunity to atone for the golden calf. So no other altar, no other altar has this particular reference about atoning, although later on, when it talks about the rites of Yom Kippur, it does talk about making atonement for the sanctuary itself, for the entire sanctuary. So Kiper alav Aharon, and Aaron shall make atonement. And what is that? Rashi tells us exactly what is this making atonement. Natan damim. It's the sprinkling of blood. Achat b'shana, once a year, and he says, B'yom HaKippurim, on the Day of Atonement, Hu shneimar ba'acharei mot, and this is mentioned later on in the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, the tractate Acharei Mot, which deals with the specific rituals of Yom Kippur. It says, V'yatza el hamizbeach, he shall go out to the altar asher lifnei Hashem, which is before the Lord, v'chiper alav, and he shall make atonement for it. And I think the idea of the need, you may be asking why the need to make atonement on the tabernacle itself. And I have a feeling it has to do with possibly some misuse, and also the fact that to come before God in an act of worship when you yourself haven't been acting in a consistent kind of way is, in fact, in some ways offensive, so that there'd be need to make atonement. Chatat, right? Mentions a sin offering. HaKippurim, right? It's an atonement, an offering, sin offering of atonement. Haim par v'sa'ir. So this is back when we read about the offerings brought on Yom Kippur. It mentions a bull and a sheep, right? Sa'ir shel Yom HaKippurim, of Yom Kippur. Mechaprim al tumat mikdashav, which comes to atone for the impurity of the sanctuary and its holy vessels. Kodesh Kodashim, it is most holy, ultimate holiness. Hamizbeach mekudash ledvarim halalu. He says this, he uses it this way, that because mukdash means it's dedicated, that this altar is dedicated to these particular things, bilvad, alone. And it is not, this altar is not used for any other kind of service. And that is the end of the Parsha for today. So I will stop the share. And looks like we do have a minion. So
yeah.
that's amazing. All right.
So maybe you want to stop the recording and we can.
Yes, I will do that. I will. Thank you.